Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya, Shrinate, and with me is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthi. Let's take this straight across to Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, who is back in North Block, hale and hearty. We at ET Now welcome Mr. Jaitley and wish him the very best as he gets back into the hot seat all over again. Clearly, the task has been cut out for the Finance Minister, who takes charge after a gap of more than 100 days. Amongst the key challenges is the wobbling rupee, which plunged below 70 to $1 last week, hitting a new low. The fisc is not in the best of health either, with the twin deficits threatening to cross that red mark all over again. Current account deficit is set to touch a historic high of nearly 2.6 percentage points of the GDP by year end, while fiscal deficit has hit 69% of the budgeted target for fiscal year 19, exposing fault lines once again.
Jaitley is resuming office at a time when trade wars are intensifying, dealing a body blow to exports. Also, India is on a weak wicket politically, with the new GDP back series data suggesting that the best years for the Indian economy came during the UPA regime, and with general elections fast approaching, belt tightening is no longer an option for the Modi government. Clearly, it's going to be a tightrope walk yet again for Arun Jaitley, who's caught between profligacy and prudence, and agenda for FM. That's the topic of discussion tonight on the India Development Debate. Joining us on the show this evening, Swaminathan Iyer, consulting editor, ET Now; Sadanand Dhume, of course, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute; Shogato Bhattacharya, chief economist at Axis Bank; and the two politicians on the show. We've got Vineet Goenka, former co-convener of the IT cell of the BJP, and Sanjay Jha, spokesperson of the Congress party. Swami, let me start off with you. As Arun Jaitley resumes charge as the Finance and Corporate Affairs Minister after a gap of over 100 days, does he find the economy in a slightly trickier spot than it was when he, when he took break from office to focus on his health?
There are some headwinds, but I would say that the situation is not alarming at all. Yes, there are some fiscal pressures. There are some problems where the GST collections are really up to the mark. On the other hand, the direct tax collections really are doing quite well. So I would say, yes, there are some headwinds, but nothing to be alarmed about. The trade deficit is widening a little, yes. And yet, the current account deficit, it may get to 2.5% of GDP, below the danger mark, I would say. Except, of course, we have to watch out in view of what's happened to Turkey and Venezuela. There is a general roiling in the markets about emerging markets. So you need to keep a watch out, but nothing to be alarmed about. The inflation side, again, the Reserve Bank has flagged a couple of issues. It has raised the interest rate a couple of times. But there again, I would say things are more or less under control. No sign of anything seriously going wrong. So this really, I would say, it's a time for a steady hand at the tiller rather than some panicky remedial moves or an attempt to win the elections with all kinds of radical goodies. I would say, keep the ship steady, keep a steady hand on the tiller. That should be Jaitley's approach.
Venturism is the big sound advice coming in from Swami there. Keep a steady hand at the tiller, as he says. But Sadanand, let me come to you. He's back at a time when there is a lot of economic narrative that's doing the rounds. I mean, government's economic track record, the NDA's economic track record particularly, is under the lens thanks to the new GDP series back data. How tough is it going to be for him to change the narrative and then defend economic growth for the Modi government, which is of course factually lower than UPA 1 and UPA 2? I'm talking about average levels of growth.
That's a great question, Supriya. And I would agree with Swami that, this is really nothing for anyone to get panicky about. But then I would add that Mr. Jaitley faces essentially three challenges. Two are legacy issues and one is going ahead. The fact is that over the past 4 years, this government has not acquired a reputation for being strongly reformist. And so that is something that will be in the mind, certainly, of foreign investors and of the world. The second is that along with that, or perhaps a subset of that, the reputation for competence did take a blow, in my opinion. You had the sort of very shabby way in which Raghuram Rajan was eased out, and then it was followed quickly by demonetization. So these are things that I think India has largely overcome. but they're there in the background. So if a crisis were to flare, say something like Turkey or some sort of global conditions were to roil in the Indian economy, I think that the legacy of this will not be good for the government. Looking ahead, the problem they really have is, and this is a problem any government has in an election year, is squaring the fact that to win votes, you're going to need to promise all kinds of things. To retain investor confidence, you're going to have to promise that you're not going to do all kinds of crazy things. And that's a dilemma that all governments face. We've already seen that foreshadowed in the Prime Minister's Independence Day speech. And it will be very interesting to see how Mr. Jaitley and his team walk this fine line.
Shogoto, comment on that before we take it to the politicians. To that sense, would the markets sort of heave a sigh of relief to see, Mr. Jaitley back in the office? Given, while we could sort of, even if you agree or disagree with Sadanand's point on the reform push, where you have to give this government perhaps credit is on, macroeconomic stability and the premium that they have attached to macroeconomic stability. And given the fact that we are going into an election year, is that sort of comforting to see Arun Jaitley back in North Block? And hopefully the government will attach that premium to macroeconomic stability in an election year. Is that how the market is going to read this?
Sorry, is that for me?
That's right.
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with you on that. So we've heard about the macro stability that partially due to external circumstances that had come about. I think one of Mr. Jaitley's biggest comfort points with investors, with markets, with people like us, analysts and economists, is I think his consensuous style of working. I mean, he's widely respected across political lines. I don't think there is too much confrontation. His strategy, his tactics are not confrontational. I mean, it's to build consensus as much as possible, as we saw in the GST Council. I think that's a very critical point to take. Sure, I mean, we all of us would have wished for some speedier reforms in many of the input markets, land, labor, probably even disinvestment to a certain extent. But given that, I mean, the sort of transformations that the government has done, the reforms that the government has put in, which is now just about bearing fruit, beginning to bear fruit. I think these are very significant things that have happened. I, for one, would have wished that the government, and as part of the entire community, I mean, analysts like me, would have communicated the fact that with the scale of reforms, the scale of changes that have been put in place, you would have naturally have expected a kind of the sort of deceleration in momentum that we have seen. Some of these, some of the actions might not have been needed fully, but overall, I think we are just about beginning to see the kind of traction that the reforms such as GST, the reforms such as IBC, IBC will take some more time, is beginning to bear fruit.
Right. Just hold that thought there, because I'm going to take it across to the politicians, and I hope to keep it civil, but I still hope to get on to facts. Sanjay Jha, let me come to you. The back series GDP data does show that Indian economy grew by over 10% twice during the Congress-led UPA's tenure, with average growth being about 8% in the 10-year period. In contrast, the growth in NDA's 4-year tenure averages about 7.2%, and which is why there is just so much of chest thumping, and which is why there is this political brownie point being scored over economic growth. But you know, the reality is that there was significant policy paralysis in your government, and the government was tainted with allegations of corruption. There has been no such thing in the NDA. There are no gross violations of propriety as we've seen it. There is no big scam that has been leveled against them.
You know, Supriya, the truth be said, I don't think Mr. Modi's government, there is no question of it matching UPA 1's 8.87% average GDP growth. I don't see them even reaching 7.39 that UPA 2 did, which was attacked relentlessly by the Bharatiya Janata Party. But let me answer your question on corruption. I think, you know, and I'm saying this with a lot of confidence, that post 2019, there will be probably monumental skeletons out of the cupboard when they roll out. Rafale is just one that you're hearing about. I think it's an open and shut case of corruption. But, you know, why would Narendra Modi delay appointing a Lokpal for 5 years? I mean, there is absolutely no logic, because the act was passed in 2013 after a lot of public demonstrations. For 5 years, Narendra Modi has done nothing about it. RTI has been diluted, and you should look at the Whistleblowers Act. It actually puts an onus on the whistleblower, and therefore these are all steps eventually to kill transparency and support a pro-corruption framework. So I think these are very, very monumental concerns that every citizen of this country should be worried about. But on a larger plane, let me tell you this, that I believe this government has wasted 5 years, Supriya. I mean, they got a strong, robust economy at nearly 6.4%, and they blew it up. And principally, it will be the decision of demonetization, very similar to the way President Erdogan has done in Turkey. So I think authoritarian political leadership comes with a lot of economic risks as well. I think the implementation of the GST, hasty, unplanned, terribly organized, and just to get, you know, brownie points and doing a midnight, you know, kind of drama in parliament to get, you know, public you know, approbations. This is not the way you run a complex economy. Okay. I think Mr. Modi's government has got no green shoots. Okay. And I agree with what some people mentioned. There are headwinds, and the headwinds are going to be US Fed rates rising. Sure. You know, there is enough to indicate that it might happen next month. Sure. They raised it 3 times last year. Sure. And that could see a massive, you know, outflow of capital from emerging market economies like India back to US fixed assets. Okay,
I take that point, Sanjay. You know, I take that point. I think eventually, you know, at some stage, you know, just to pick up on the point made by Shogoto, eventually the way to judge is to look at the reforms undertaken by this government, and like Shogoto says, it's led to some deceleration in growth. So in balance, was it worth a deceleration? That is the assessment that we need to do, but that's for another debate. Vineet Goenka, let's leave all the rhetoric aside. Let's not let this debate digress to Rafale and everything else. Simple question, which is the fact of the matter is, as per this GDP series data, you know, the track record of growth of the UPA wasn't as bad as you made it out to be. Plain and simple. What is the government now going to do to seize control of narrative? Now that we have Arun Jaitley back in the office of North Block, what can the government now do to seize control of the economic narrative?
Okay, let me just say there are two parts to my speaking here. One part is what is going on in the last 4 years and what happened then in the EPA era. Now, if you see, the taste of the pudding is in tasting it. Census all-time high, more than 38,400. If you see Nifty all-time high, 11,600. There are all these metrics and the agencies talking about, Morgan Stanley, maybe then CIA talking about, they are all positive about this. I see GST demonetization as best reform in the entire independent India. This will increase the tax base. Number 2, the honest will get its due and everybody will come on. Now, whenever this kind of reforms have been introduced, there are going to be hiccups, and which we saw. But if you see the month-wise collection, it's increasing, and the number of people who are applying for GST will be. As the e-way will be implemented, I think more ease will come in, and you will see that the honest businessmen, the honest trades will benefit out of this. Number 2, 1991 till 2003, there were domestic reforms, there were international growth stories which helped us. But if you see from 2003 to 2008, we just benefited because of that reforms which happened between 91 to 2003 and the introduction of various schemes in the NDA 1 period, which Manmohan Singh ji benefited. But the entire policy paralysis and coupled with reckless lending from the banks and entire extreme disregard to the fiscal discipline, I think that led to the falling of the entire economy and the crumbling down. Now here, if you see in 2014 to 2015, I'll give you just
Vineet, go and come here, just come in there.
99 to 2004, it was 0.5%.
No, Vineet, go and come. Vineet, go and come. Give me a minute. Vineet Goenka, let me come in because I will talk about the current account deficit a little later when I'm touching upon the rupee, and I'm just doing that. I think what you're conveniently forgetting, and it's important to remind you, and I'm just doing my job as a, as somebody who's anchoring the show, is There was also a global recession, which you conveniently seem to have forgotten. It's important to remind you of that. There were global tailwinds, but there was also a big global headwind. Don't forget about that. But anyways, I'm going to go to Swami right now. And Swami, rupee has weakened by more than 9% in 2018 versus the dollar. It has also weakened the most against the dollar compared to all other Asian currencies. How big a concern is that going to be for Finance Minister Jaitley?
This should not be a concern. There has been a criticism from a number of people that the real effective exchange rate is significantly higher than it really should be, and that therefore it needs to come down. As now, how do we bring it down? It wasn't quite clear. But if Turkey has helped to bring it down, if Venezuela has to help to bring it down, so be it. Certainly the export community, I would say, is extremely happy with what's happened right now. I would even say on your stock markets, some of the companies who are big exporters have seen a big leap in their share prices. So as I said, the so-called weakening rupee, I mean, some people would still argue it's too strong. I would say that, it's in a bracket of acceptability. There is no problem either way. I wouldn't say that it's too high or too low. I would allow the market forces to play the role that they are playing right now. But Jaitley should be focusing on the real economy. He should be focusing on what's happened on the fiscal side, on the inflation side, what's happening on the banks. He shouldn't be worrying about the rupee. Don't focus on the currency.
Sadanand, would you agree with that? I know the rupee is the value of the rupee has become a political talking point here, and partly the BJP is to be blamed as well, because when they were in opposition, they attached national pride to the value of the currency. I don't understand why is that needed to be done. But what's your own sense on the currency? I mean, should we just let the markets decide? Like Swami pointed out, the real effective exchange rate is still pretty strong. I mean, it's actually strengthened 20%. So there's scope for the rupee to weaken further.
Two quick points. The first is that, this is at this point a political question. If every voter had the sophistication of Swaminathan Iyer, this would not be a political question. The fact is that this is a political question, and it's a political question precisely because the BJP made it a political question in 2013. And you cannot expect the Congress not to take advantage of this idea that a strong currency is equated with a strong nation, even though that may not make economic sense. That's point number one. Secondly, even though that, the comparisons with India and Turkey, at one level make no sense, they're completely overdrawn. The fact is that we all know that when markets move, very often people tend to move with this herd mentality. And so what India needs to guard against is this notion that people will view it as belonging in the same basket as Turkey. In a sense, it does already because it's a developing economy, but by drawing more parallels. And there, I fear that the government has not been very sophisticated. For instance, appointing someone with Gurumurthi's reputation to the to the board of the Reserve Bank of India. So they need to be a little bit smarter about how parallels may be drawn in these very volatile circumstances.
He was, of course, referring to S. Gurumurthi and not to my dear friend Sandeep Gurumurthi here. Just a quick clarification there. But I'm going to take this across to Vineet. And Vineet, I know you want to make a point there, but I have a follow-up to what Sadanand said. And in some sense, the rupee debate is perhaps misplaced because 70 to a dollar or 60 to a dollar, a real effective exchange rate, it is sub 70 right now, even though the rupee crossed 70. It was then sub 66 in 2013. The blame lies with you, and the blame lies with the fact that you spoke about 40 to a dollar. And I asked that question to Mr. Chidambaram, and he said, I don't want to comment on the exchange rate, but I'm just showing the mirror back to the BJP. They wanted to make it about the political debate. They said 40 to a dollar if the Modi government comes to power. Then leader of the opposition in Lok Sabha, the prime ministerial candidate, they're all on record to say 40 to a dollar. So perhaps you erred. Will you agree that you erred?
No. See, I'll tell you,
seems to give away
the
a lot more
rupee
than you want to say.
falling is two reasons. One, there was more demand from the importers. the demand from the importers increased it, and number two, the interest rates in US and the demand from the US market itself also led to the money going out of, rupee going out of this. But I see this as to be a positive point, because here the exports will boost. Number two, you see how proactive our central bank, that is the RBI, was there. It preempted by increasing the repo rates. Now these kind of aware steps help the entire economy, and I see this as to be a good step. Rather than calling what Chidambaram said or what we said, I would see that this is a fallout of the entire legacy issue plus the current market which is there. But let me come back to the point where you interrupted earlier, where the entire current account balance was minus 3.3, today is 1.2. That shows the boost of 2.2, and there are fundamental growths. We have done away with many other things, like the transparency has come, which was never there in the entire UPA era. I think the transparency will help us in the long term. GST will help us in the long term. Demonetization has migrated
Vinit Goenka, okay, Vinit Goenka, I take that point. Allow me to interrupt you. We're talking about the rupee. Sanjay Jha wants to come in with a quick rebuttal, and then I'm coming to you, Shogoto. Sanjay.
Let me tell you, Sandeep, I don't agree with Swaminathan Iyer at all. If people believe that further depreciation of the rupee is good for Indian economy, I think they're making an extremely, I would say, myopic assessment. There are two realities. Number one, if the rupee were to weaken further, you actually have imports don't necessarily shrink by a similar percentage. So you will be importing a lot of inflation into the Indian economy. Second, don't forget, exporters, by the way, also come under a lot of pressure from their own markets abroad, who know that they are benefiting from a currency which goes in their favor. So their margins really do squeeze in as well. And don't forget that ultimately this is a depreciation is a relative issue. So, while Indian currency is depreciated, so have other Asian economies whom we compete with in the export business. I think the reality is very straightforward, and I'll give you hard data. The world economy has never looked more robust in the last 8 years as it's looking over the last 3 years. I read an IMF prediction, Supriya, where they have said that the GDP growth rate worldwide is going to be 3.9% this year and probably 4% next year. So clearly these were tailwinds that the government has actually blown. If you really, you have a growing
Sanjay, okay, Sanjay, I have a bone to pick with you. We'll talk about the tailwinds in a bit. Swami has to come in, since you disagreed with his assessment of the rupee. Only fair, I let Swami respond to you. I know in the last debate as well, the two of you had an exchange. So I'm going to Swami and then I'll come to you, Shogoto. Allow me to come back to you in a minute. Swami, over to you. So I'm going to Swami and then I'll come to you, Shogoto. Allow me to come back to you in a minute. Swami, over to you.
But as far as the rupee is concerned, the important point I would say is that any number of studies have been done, and they suggest that the value of the rupee is not very strongly linked to our exports, and the conditions of world demand and international markets matter much more. So, obviously the currency exchange rate does matter, but in the case of India, it doesn't matter as much as in a whole lot of other countries. In these circumstances, as I said, I would not be in favor of aggressive intervention one way or the other. There are some occasions when the thing can go completely haywire. If you go back to the taper tantrum that we saw in 2013, when the rupee went from 55 to 68, that was a depreciation of more than 20% in a very way. Obviously, you need to do something to check that kind of thing. The kind of movements we are seeing are far gentler. They are the kind of movements you should see in a market. And when you have the international tides moving as they are, I think it's an appropriate thing that at this point of time the dollar has strengthened so much. There is a case for saying that in these times the dollar is a safe haven. Money has gone into the dollar. Is this going to lead to something like the taper tantrum of 2013? As of now, I don't see that sign. It seems overblown. In fact, it seems to me very often that we are constantly chasing the ghosts of yesterday. And because it happened in 2013, will it happen again? No, I don't really see any sign of that happening right now. So I'll simply say that, the earlier point that Supriya made is relevant. That there is this macho business about how, a strong rupee means that, I can put my mooch up, and a weak rupee means that the mooch goes down. That is crap. It has no economic sense, it has no common sense. I'm glad Supriya brought it up. And we have to say that a slight weakening of the rupee is absolutely nothing to do with national prestige of any kind. In fact, as I said, China right now is in trouble for saying that it became too competitive through devaluation. So I would say that, let's not get too much into the rupee business. The currency matters. It does not matter so much. There are many, many more important things in the economy. What's happening, the fisc on the monetary side, on the inflation side. There are so many more important topics. Please, let's not just focus on the rupee.
That point, I'll take that cue and not focus on the rupee. Shogoto, let's put this in context. Weak currency along with volatile oil prices will exert pressure on the trade deficit and consequently on the current account deficit, which many believe could end at levels of close to 2.6, maybe even 3% of GDP in FY19 versus 1.9% that we saw in FY18. How worried would you be? Is that a fault line that's emerging on the macroeconomic front?
So let me take that back a little bit. See the rupee in the context. Supriya mentioned that she's completely right that we have underperformed many of our Asian emerging market currencies in 2018. But in the context, I mean, if you see the rupee versus the dollar from 2014 onwards, the rupee has been steady like a rock, which is what, in fact, has actually incentivized many of the foreign investors to come into the rupee. Investors always like a stable currency. So from the returns that you see from 2014, I mean, we have outperformed many other currencies. So that's the strength of the rupee. So I mean, the current fall has to be seen in this context. Mr. Iyer was completely right that a large part of the movement of the rupee is as part of the emerging markets basket, influenced by the dollar. So the strength of the dollar has caused the entire emerging markets basket to weaken, and the rupee in 2018 has weakened a little bit more. And that relative weakening of the rupee is actually to do with the macro fundamentals, particularly the current account deficit, the trade deficit, which is a function largely of oil, not completely, largely of oil, and that is what has driven the rupee downwards. Having said this, though, and remember Governor Patel's exhortation to run for the economy to be run as a tight ship to ensure macroeconomic stability is the key to control or whatever. I mean, not allow the rupee to fluctuate too much. The rupee will move. I mean, the Reserve Bank. I don't want to have to say this explicitly, but there is only so much that the central bank can do with the currency. It can move. It can tamper the volatility of the rupee, but not completely control the direction of the movement. So the need to run a tight ship. And it is there that I'm a little bit more worried than Mr. Iyer in terms of the current account deficit. What has happened is previously with the fall in the oil import bill from electronics, other equipment manufacturers, that had gone up. And now with the oil bill having gone up, that has not reduced. I mean, so that's leading to the rise in the trade deficit. And unfortunately, we had relied to a certain extent on relatively volatile portfolio flows to finance this deficit, and that has come down.
Yes. You make a good point there, Shogato, but I just think CAD is a fault line. The government can live in denial. The reality is it's going to shoot up to levels of 2.3 to 2.6% of the GDP from the previous 1.9. And I don't think anybody can deny the fact that there is a lack of strategy as far as dealing with CAD or even the rupee is concerned. Yes, you don't need to throw the reserves behind, but there is a lack of strategy. Is there a new fault line even in terms of the fiscal deficit? And Sadanand, this one's for you. GST revenues are still to stabilize. They still are nowhere close to that asking rate of 1.15 lakh crore rupees. Divestment target is way off the mark. In any case, Air India sale is not going to go through. How challenging is it going to be to meet the fiscal deficit target of 3.3%? So yes, perhaps CAD is a concern, but is fisc beginning to pose a threat as well?
No, I would certainly say it's difficult, simply because this is an election year. And if you're looking at the cues that are being given, for example, in the Prime Minister's speeches, it's very, very clear that he is positioning himself in 2019 as a great welfarist in the grand UPA tradition. And so he has already sort of, laid out a vision that basically is about handing out a lot of good things to a lot of people. It's not clear how we're going to pay for this. But going in, I think the pressure is to be even more generous is going to be great. So for sure, the question really is not whether the fiscal deficit will grow. The question is how much, and how much will Mr. Jaitley be able to balance this? The second question, since you raised privatization, is that the privatization program has frankly, is descended to a level of farce. LIC buying a stake in IDBI, and then this sort of thing being talked up as some great achievement. The fact is that this government has not approached privatization in the correct way, which is to streamline the economy and make sure that assets are used effectively. It has instead used it as some kind of dubious accounting exercise. So maybe at sort of some level, this is sort of allows it to get better fiscal numbers than it would otherwise. But I'm afraid that at some point, someone is going to have to pay the bill for this kind of jugglery.
That's a good point you're making, and I think it's important to mention, since we are having this conversation on a day when Arun Jaitley is taken charge again as a finance minister, is that both the points that you made, the LIC IDBI controversial deal that we've been critical of, and the failed Air India privatization, both happened at a time when the finance ministry was not under the watch of Arun Jaitley. More importantly, on privatization, Arun Jaitley is perhaps the biggest proponent of privatization in this government, in this cabinet. He's given an interview to ET Now in the past saying that, he believes we should be more aggressive. In fact, he set the ball rolling as far as privatization of Air India is concerned. So, Vineet Goenka, simple question. Let's keep politics aside. Now that we've got him back at the helm, can we expect a renewed focus on this, or given the fact that we are staring at elections a few months down the line, will the government go back to the welfare policies that Sadanand spoke about, that that we tend to associate more with the UPA?
See, you would have seen Modi ji's government and also both the finance minister, whether it is Arun Jaitley ji when he was there now, or in between when there was a gap and Piyush ji was handling it, all believe in long-term reforms and they do not get into any kind of appeasement. I'll just give you what was the GEA figures, the industry-wise estimates which are there. One particular pointer, construction industry, it is 11.5% growth, which was never seen. It was negative earlier. Now the road built-ups, the infrastructure built-up which has been there, the boost it will give to the entire economy, it is tremendous. If I just quote you the figures of the GDP, it will tell you how it is growing every quarter. Quarter 1, 5.6, quarter 2, 6.3, quarter 3, 7.0. Now this growth which is going up, this is equal, even after demonetization, even after the GST, and as the GST reforms will go penetrate further and it will help the economy, I think it is going to boost up. What I see is not less than 7.4% growth, and coming back of Arun Jaitley ji will also further help it, because he is a seasoned person, he has experience, and the 3 months which he was not there gave him some more time to think over it. So probably his coming back is going to add one more hand to the government, also one more thinking person to the government. So it's a welcome.
Okay, it's a welcome move. We are happy to have Finance Minister Arun Jaitley back in North Block, and we're going to make no two-way bones about this. But let me just go across to Sanjay Jha. And Sanjay, very often we've criticized the handling of the economy and all of that, but truth be told, things are beginning to look up. I mean, there was a huge NPA mess and many people thought that things aren't taking off because of this, the twin balance sheet problems and all of that. But you are seeing early signs of revival. Capacity utilization has gone up, and that is perhaps an encouraging, sign. It will also perhaps help in Finance Minister Jaitley weaning off the public sector investment growth model. The moment the private sector can be crowded in. So capacity utilization is perhaps is a good encouraging sign. It means that investment, private investment, is perhaps going to follow next, the big private investment. Will you deny this?
Supriya, I'll tell you why I would feel that we should be circumspect and not optimistic. One aspect when private capital investment is concerned that we tend to ignore is how this government has actually indulged very brazenly in tax terrorism. I live in Mumbai, and I can tell you I meet a lot of my counterparts who are working with multinationals and domestic corporates and banks, and they will tell you that they are terrified of the midnight knock at the door. And I think this has been, in my opinion, one of those factors that don't get publicly discussed for reasons we all know. But end of the day, there is a lot of fear at the moment of the institutional mechanisms under the government. The second point also is, I think, linked to the current account deficit to some extent, because if you're going to have a depreciating rupee that some panelists seem to love, backed by at the same time a rising oil price, then you are going to see a situation of rising interest rates. So I really feel that, I remember when Raghuram Rajan left, everybody was critical that, repo rates had to be brought down. You had repo rates come down. Did it really result in a boom in, what we call as a gross fixed capital investment? It didn't happen. So the truth is that we have missed the bus. I've been in politics long enough to tell you that Mr. Modi and his government is now going to be only focused on campaigning. There are 4 big states going to polls in December. I think they have basically now, kind of written off whatever, has happened. They're going to hope for some luck. But, at the moment, I'm also worried about the monsoon, how it's going to end up. The predictions don't look very strong. There's scattered rainfall. And,
Sure.
there are worries on that front as well.
Okay.
So
okay.
I believe that there are no green shoots. Index of industrial production has been highly erratic.
Sure.
And I believe we have missed the bus. And I think this is tragic.
Okay.
Because we may be political
Sanjay,
rivals, but I do feel that the BJP had an opportunity that they completely and thoroughly messed up with.
I like the doomsday scenario that you're painting out here, but I don't think the situation is as bad as you're making it out to be. Yes, there are concerns like Swami pointed out, but it's not. We're growing at over 7%. Surely that can't be all that bad. But Swami, NPA, the crackdown on NPA, one would argue that not enough has been done, or they've sort of taken confusing steps. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. While Jaitley was away, the interim finance minister launched what was called Project Sashakt, yet another effort to tackle bad loans, which many believe is sort of confusing the entire resolution process. In some sense, some believe it undermines the IBC process because, the funding model of these AMCs is being questioned, that's being proposed. So what's your own sense? I mean, do you think now with Jaitley back, because one would have imagined that the IBC was a good framework to address this NPA problem, and suddenly one gets a feeling that the momentum is not there anymore. Do you believe Jaitley coming back will restore some of that momentum?
I think the momentum is there. We are getting offers, and offers are getting better and better. That's a positive sign. So it does appear that the amount of recovery that you're going to get is better. At the same time, I would say the real problem is that the entire infrastructure for resolution looks so hopelessly inadequate. I mean, by now the number of cases coming up, the list is getting longer and longer. The resolution process is taking well over that 270 days that we talked about. RBI wants to get very, very tough now on the power and the other projects. Do we have enough professionals? Do we have enough judges? Do we have enough infrastructure to actually catch hold of this huge mess and quickly resolve it? So it seems to me that yes, there is some progress on some cases, and thank heavens that at long last, we are getting an exit policy for some incompetent or crooked promoters. But does the whole process make you enthused that, finally we've got a grip on this? I do not think we have a grip on this. We are going in the right direction, but the entire infrastructure for resolution needs to be made much stronger and much faster. And within that, yes, we do need to find ways of reducing the number of cases that go to the NCLT, and if it can be done through various other means, well and good. But as I said, overall, we need a much faster resolution than we've had so far, even though it's been a good start.
Quick question to Shougata. And Shougata, I know Sadanand and Swami have spoken about privatization and divestment and all of that. The fact is that Mr. Jaitley has been away for 3 months, and he was heading that GOM on Air India privatization. Of course, Air India privatization could not take off because there were no takers for this. And it all happened in his absence. What must he do now? It's a big revenue resource. Everybody believes the government has no business running in Air India. There's no point putting good money behind bad. And yet, in an election year, do we expect the sale to go through? Also, the question is, how else can he handle it?
So again, I mean, I think all of you are completely right that all of us probably wished that some of the assets of the government, some government companies would, during the last 2 or 3 years, have actually been privatized. It's a difficult process. I mean, again, Mr. Jaitley's style the consensus style, probably wanted to get many more stakeholders on board. I don't think very much can be done this year. So again, the differentiation between a privatization and a disinvestment. So disinvestment is an important source of government revenues, and I think you will again see some other non-privatization source of disinvestment that will meet the disinvestment targets. I think this is a process, whichever the government that comes in, and this government actually has shown the intent to start privatization. How much it succeeded is a different matter altogether. Having said this, I think come back to the question of the fisc, that given the way that interest rates have risen, the government does not have too much scope for expenditure, for increasing expenditure, and expending and keeping the pace of expenditure, I think, is important in an environment where the recovery is fragile. The green shoots that are evident needs to be kept going, so the government has to spend. And this is where a more imaginative use of the existing government assets, be it land, be it airspace, I mean, there are plenty of issues. Resolve some of the tax cases that are still in litigation. I think the government has scope to increase revenues, and it is these revenues which, other than expanding the fiscal deficit, which is a no-no at this point in time, right, I think might come in use to stabilize the recovery that we are just about beginning to see.
Okay, and hopefully the government will look at that. But, Sadanand, Shogato kept talking about the fact that, Mr. Jaitley is a sort of consensus builder and sort of, is respected across political lines, which he perhaps is without a doubt in this political establishment in the center. But the fact of the matter is we often don't talk about, we've been very critical of the policy paralysis that happened at the UPA, but there seems to be a policy paralysis of a different kind now, the kind of mess that we're seeing in the bureaucracy. I mean, you have an ED official in an open spat with the revenue secretary that's fanned by a member of the BJP himself in Subramaniam Swamy. You have the number 1 and the number 2 officials of the CBI, the director and the head of prosecution fighting with each other. I mean, these sort of, one would have imagined for a strong government with a strong prime minister, such things, should be unthinkable, unheard of. And here you have an ED official writing an open letter to the revenue secretary, CBI's top 2 officials. I mean, where is the accountability? I mean, can Arun Jaitley, be someone who could sort of, will he have the sweeping authority to intervene and bring some sort of order at this stage? Because a lot of CEOs that we speak to are wondering, this seems to be policy paralysis of a very different kind.
No, that's a very good point. I wouldn't call it policy paralysis, but it is a sort of, there's a certain amount of chaos that is creeping in that one would not expect, given the kind of majority that this government has and so on. I just want to say one quick thing about privatization here and disagree with Swagato. I think we're being far too kind to the government and Mr. Jaitley. I can show intent to go to the gym by buying a new pair of gym shorts, but you're going to have to judge me on whether I actually get anything done. And that has to be the yardstick for this government too. Why are we busy sort of saying that, oh, the intent was great? I don't care about the intent. We're almost at the end of a term. It's 5 wasted years, and we should be able to say that boldly. So on this sort of question of bureaucracy, I do think, and I'm optimistic there, that Jaitley's return will have an impact. He certainly is the kind of person who has the stature to rein some of this stuff in. And so I'm broadly hopeful. Let's see.
Okay. Vineet, I'm going to come to you. Chief Economic Advisor, the one who's just left, Arvind Subramanian, and somebody who called Jaitley Mr. Minister, spoke assertively of something called stigmatized capitalism. And he spoke repeatedly of it, and he said stigmatized capitalism is causing the Indian economy much harm. It actually means that people are not going to invest, industry is going to be looked at suspiciously. And truth be told, your government has tried to manage perceptions ever since allegations of Soot Boot Ki Sarkar and everything came to fore. What is it that the government can do now or needs to do now to address issues and unleash animal spirits? What can you do now to comfort Indian industry instead of just managing perceptions?
Okay, so I've been hearing, and there are a lot of things which I want to speak. So allow me some 30-40 seconds uninterrupted. 3 indicators and then 3 comparisons, and then I'll answer your part. Now, if you see the average growth story, 2004 to 2014, China had 10.3%. Currently, it is 6.9%. If you see emerging markets, it was 6.4%. Currently, it's 4.5%. Yet, we could manage and maintain 7.4% of the growth. That shows one thing, that there is a stability. Let me give you fiscal deficit. Atalji handed over the government at 4.3 in 2004. Manmohan Singh ji took it up till 6.5% deficit. Then currently it is 3.5%, which shows revival, and it also shows there are positive things. If you see the CPI inflation, Atalji handed over the government at 4.1% inflation. It went as high as 10.4%, first time double digit inflation. Now it is back to 4.7. Now this indicator shows that there are a lot of reforms which are happening. There are also some comparisons. Non-performing prime ministers versus decisive leadership of Modi ji. Tented ministers of UPA versus clean ministers, scam-free government of this NDA. So transparency because of Aadhar. Aadhar itself has spent more than 90,000 crore rupees of drainage which was happening in this system. So these all indicators show that.
But Vineet, I have asked you another question.
You have to answer the earlier questions, right? When you have answered, allow me to answer the earlier questions also, which Sanjay Jhaji made. So all this indicator shows that there have been reforms, and the reforms are very positive. And I personally believe that strong reforms like GST and demonetization will help us in the long term. And as far as one statement which was made by Sanjay ji, tax terrorism. I think, only those who actually
same thing you're saying again and again, GST and demonetization, going back to you. No, you're not answering my question. No, Vineet, please hold on. I'll go across to Sanjay. I asked you a very direct question on stigmatized capitalism. You're going back to GST and demonetization. You've been saying this in every answer of yours. Sanjay Jha, I have a larger question to ask of you. As 2019 approaches, and Mr. Jaitley will have the challenging task of defending the growth record and economic reforms and all of that. Who will understand this better than you? Do people buy reforms? Because according to you, the Congress reformed a lot in UPA 1 and UPA 2, and look how you were booted out. Do people really buy economic reforms? Is that really an economic issue, election issue?
Well, Supriya, a very pertinent question. I mean, a lot of us here who are talking on the panel are probably, more privileged to be able to discuss things like current account deficit, fiscal deficit, and structural reforms. I think where the common man is concerned, people like to look at some fundamentals, inflation and jobs. And I believe, and if you look at, two things that we didn't discuss so far, and maybe I would like to bring it up, is the rural distress in India. The farmers' protest, trust me, is a real, genuine, authentic, shall we say, angst over the way they have been marginalized. And this has happened, by the way, despite a couple of years of good monsoon. I don't want to get into the whole debate of the MSP betrayal. But look at jobs. I think that's one thing that is going to be a critical play in 2019. Because everybody knows, yes, it's become a more automated economy worldwide. But did the government do anything significant to address the problem? I don't think so. At the end of 5 years, you can't come and say that, we need another 5 years. And, the other part which I think is relevant is, again, as you rightly mentioned, is inflation. If you look at the fact that this government, and, I had Vineet right now saying there was higher inflation during our time. Well, honesty demands that he should also tell the people watching your very good program that under the time of the UPA, we dealt with oil prices peaking at $145 a barrel, an average over $110 a barrel. And Mr. Modi's government had the huge bonanza of oil prices at $30 a barrel. You collected 5 lakh crores of rupees. What did you do with that?
Sanjay, here's the thing. Let's not make this about UPA and NDA. I'm completely running out of time. Let's not make this about UPA and NDA. The fact is that, the fact that Arun Jaitley is perhaps the most equipped in this political establishment to be in North Block, is back in North Block, is welcome news. We should all welcome that. And hopefully he'll put the spotlight back on the reform agenda and fix the fault lines that are now appearing on the macroeconomic front. Sanjay Jha, Vineet Goenka, Shogoto, Swami and Sadanand, appreciate you taking the time and joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate.
Thank you very much for being with us. We're happy to see a hale and hearty Arun Jaitley back. It's over to Tanya for Top 10 at 10.